Hey, this is Mike, and I'm with Joanne Kennon today, and we're going to talk about her experiences with the Dodgers. Hey, Joanne.
Hello, how are you?
Doing all right. So let's get right into it here. So tell us, when did you work with the Dodgers?
I started charity work with the Dodgers in the early 80s, like 81, 80, right around there.
And what kinds of things were you doing? I mean, how did you get connected with the Dodgers?
Well, we it's I was started with the LA Dodgers 65 Roses Club, but let me go back.
Okay.
Uh, Don Baylor with the Angels started the Angels 65 Roses Club, and that was a child's way of saying cystic fibrosis.
Ah,
At that time, the average age of a CF child was preschool.
okay.
So we were in major research mode to raise money to find a cure for this disease. Now, we have found a partial cure for some of them through these years, but the average age now is in their 50s. So it's made a big difference.
Oh,
And then when I got with the Dodgers, or I was asked to join the Dodgers because there were no women in the 65 Roses Club. So um, I joined the 65 Roses Club, and that was a membership that you paid $250 to join and $10 for every home run the Dodgers hit.
so which Dodgers, were involved with this?
Started out, Jerry Royce was our first chairman. And then we had Mike Sosha. And then we became on the map, so to speak, because almost all of the major league teams had 65 Roses clubs now. So then Orel Hershiser became our 65 Roses membership person. Kirk Gibson became our silent auction chairman. And Brett Butler was very involved too.
So what was their motivation? I mean, what was the players' motivation for, getting involved with this?
I, you know, I think because Orel was dedicated to giving back to the community and that he was a family man, that he couldn't imagine losing a child.
Hmm.
Uh, Kirk Gibson, if I were totally honest, got involved because of his mother. And that was because she was in the Tigers 65 Roses. And I met her and she wanted to know what our success is because it was a limited club and it was an elite club. And we had to find a way to make it grow because the most you could raise was about $65,000 a year. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you're funding doctors and research, that was just a drop in the bucket. So she wanted to know, and I said, I'd love to share that with you, but Kirk Gibson's joining us today, and he's on a short timeline. And she reached in her pocket and pulled out a set of car keys, and she said, he's not going anywhere. I'm his mother. So he didn't like after game events. What constituted when you joined the 65 Roses, you got, if you were a regular member, you got 4 tickets once a month to scheduled games. And then after the games, there was some kind of an event, whether it was questions and answers and picture opportunities on the field or behind the dugout or in the stadium club, or a tour of the stadium. We had several things for interest, and we always had, I'm going to say, a plethora of Dodger players that would join us and participate in it. And it only lasted an hour to an hour and a half after the designated games. But Kirk Gibson did not want to do that because he really was in pain. And so he told me he'd do whatever I wanted. So Jerry Royce had originally started an auction by mail, and Kirk Gibson picked up that bat and went with it.
So tell us some more of the stories, I mean, behind this, I mean, it's fascinating to me that you worked with all of these players who, of course, I know, but yeah, tell us some stories about these guys.
Oh, it was fun. Of one time I remember one of the members asked Mike Sosha one time, what do you say when you go out to the mound and talk to a pitcher? I mean, what is it you're trying to convey, higher, lower, faster, harder, whatever. And he walked out, and I think it was Welch was on the mound, and he said, what's up? And Timmy said, have you ever been on a boat to Catalina and saw the sun shining on the water? And Mike is looking kind of not turning his head, but flashing his eyes from side to side. And he's going, who's listening to this? And he goes, yes, well, I have, but you need to turn that boat around and come back into the game. And that was the way it was handled. It was just funny. And it was, you don't think about what they say out there. You figure it's all baseball, but I do think they all, have their wishes where they were on that afternoon or something, and it works.
So tell us some stuff about Jerry Royce. I mean, what kind of chairperson was he? How did he do his job?
Jerry Royce was very meticulous about how he did things and wanted to make sure that he had all the right answers to the questions. And one time I took him to Chalk Hospital in LA to visit the CF clinic and different things. And all of our literature said that cystic fibrosis was mainly a Caucasian disease. And the first child he met was Hispanic. And the next one was, I forget what she was, but it was a little girl, and she wasn't white. And he looked at me and he goes, evidently we're not getting the right information. So I had to be real careful and very straightforward with him. And he was a good, he came to all the games. He invited players. He insisted, I used to write letters to invite players. He insisted on inviting them himself, so he knew who was coming and what he was going to talk about.
Were there any other Dodgers that, got involved even tangentially in this?
Well, there were yes. I'll tell you, one of our biggest and most awesome supporters was Roy Campanella, which was a Brooklyn Dodger. But when we would have him at a banquet, because there was a banquet at either the beginning of the year or the end of the year, usually the same weekend as the baseball writers' dinner, because we knew all the Dodgers would be in town. And when he spoke, you could hear a pin drop, and he was the most mesmerizing gentleman there ever was. And I say gentleman because he truly was a gentleman. And I don't know if most people understand, but when you're a quadriplegic, you don't feel pain. And you have a hard time controlling your voice muscles and all that, because everything is so paralyzed in your body. You don't take deep breaths to talk and enunciate. It was just interesting. And one day his wife called me. She said, Roy's in the hospital and he's really depressed and I don't know what to do. He's got 4 broken bones and he's in intensive care. So we had friends within the entertainment community that loved baseball too. And the Manhattan transfer happened to be Tim Hauser used to always go to fantasy camp in Florida. And I called him, and he and the whole Manhattan transfer, all 4 of them, came to the hospital with prearrangements, of course, and did a private concert for Roy Campanella.
Wow.
Nobody knew about it. The doctors would stop, the nurses would stop, but it was not advertised. It was not publicized. They just did it because they loved baseball and they loved him.
Yeah, wow. That's just an amazing story. To know that you met Roy Campanella is just one of the all-time, greats, in baseball. Unbelievable.
He actually gave me his original last Brooklyn Dodger jacket to auction off.
Wow. And you did?
At that time, we made about $4,500, I think, at that time. And I will tell you, this was before eBay. We would get a full page ad in Baseball Collectors Digest, or if it was at an event like that one happened to be at one of our dinners, there were several phones in the room where bidders were bidding over the telephone.
That's amazing. Wow. So is that how you raised money then for this? You had auctions.
We had the auction by mail. We also had a fashion show where I would say 80% of the Dodgers were the wives and kids were on stage, and maybe 65% of the players, and the rest people would pay to sit with, like Tommy Lasorda or somebody like that. And one I remember particularly, we actually auctioned off Eric Karros and Mike Piazza's jerseys off their backs while they were on the runway.
That's just incredible. I mean, how did you get involved? You know, what kind of is in your background, your experience that got you involved in this?
Well, first of all, I got involved in cystic fibrosis because my best friend had 2 children that had it. Okay. And we were close to the same age, and our kids were like, 6-8 months apart, and we just were close, and I didn't have to deal with the disease, so I had to find a way to do it. So I started volunteering. And then that just grew, and I had never done anything like this in my life. I had never, I say it's charmed because I would just think of ideas and then find a way to make them happen and make them grow. And that's what we did. When Mrs. Gibson came to me, she wanted to know how we made so much money. And I said to her, well, you can only have 65 members. So what we did do is we had corporate sponsors for each game date, and they would pay more money for every game date. So then they would take all of our overhead away, and we'd still have money left from that, meaning overhead. We had to buy tickets. We had 300 tickets, 1 day a month, every month through baseball. And then, of course, we got World Series tickets, which was nice.
Wow. And again, how many years were you involved with this?
About 18.
Okay. And
I retired, however you want to put it, the year before Mr. O'Malley sold.
Okay. So did you have any interactions with Mr. O'Malley then?
Yes. And his sister, Mrs. Snyder, would come to all the fashion shows and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah.
So tell us about him.
Very humble people. Mr. O'Malley had once commented that I could get more out of his players than he could. And of course he signed their checks, so whatever. And I just would ask something for free, and I guess I looked like I needed it more. But yeah, not a lot of interaction, but some. Yeah. I remember one big time, and it wasn't with him, it was with Tommy Hawkins. When Tommy Hawkins was a vice president of the Dodgers, LA Cellular was a member of our club at a $1,500 level. And they didn't join, and we were printing our stationery. And all of a sudden, the day I had okayed the stationery to go to press, we received a $350,000 check made out to LA Dodgers, 65 Roses. I called LA Cellular and asked politely, could I please talk to somebody in charge of donations? They said, well, is it over $500? I said, yes. Is it over $5,000? Yes. Oh, well, that guy's on vacation. He just left for a 3-week honeymoon. So I put the money in a private account, and then I called Tommy Hawkins and I said, don't worry about your money. I found out it was to It was to sponsor LA Cellular kiosk at the stadium. But I couldn't return it to anybody. So I just kept it for 3 weeks and then got the interest and gave it back. Yeah, there were a lot of good times, a lot of fun, happy times of different things that, went on with the Dodgers and their wives and their families. And yeah, and they again were all so receptive. Some of the, like Brett Butler's kids would befriend CF kids because they would be in the show too, to show the progress and how, I remember one of our girls saying, when I was born, my mother, why would my parents teach me ABCs when the average age was preschool that you would pass? And then, but I'm tenacious and my parents did. And then she went through every 10 years or so of the milestones of beating CF, growing up with it, still had it, but beating the odds. And she said, now I went to college. And she said, honey, I met the love of my life. And that night she announced she was going to have a baby. And Orel Hershiser was sitting in the audience. Kirk Gibson was in the audience. There were a couple other, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house, including Orel behind me going like this, because it was just, he had known Kathy for a whole lot of years and watched her grow. And it was rewarding for him to know that he played a part in some of the research monies that kept her alive and gave her a good life.
Wow. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Walt Alston?
No.
He wasn't.
No, I did not meet him.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Vin Scully, yes.
Scully.
What a gentleman there too.
Yeah.
But he would just announce for us or do like a PSA or something, but he never got real involved.
Yeah. Who else? Tell us some other stories about, events or, just what you learned about, these guys who, they're somewhat put on pedestals, of course, but they're just ordinary people.
Well, they are ordinary people. They are, the problem is we put them on a pedestal and then they have to live up to it. And that sometimes is hard too, when they want to go home. I remember Bill Russell, very shy man, very shy. Yeah. And his daughters were having a terrible time because there were teenage girls that had posters of their dad on their bedroom walls, and they just couldn't understand it. That was their father. And it's just a little bit more privacy than you want to let go of sometimes. And especially the family don't understand it because they're just their dad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the different stories that we had. I will tell you about the silent auction that we had. It was always run the whole month of October. We took the center section of Baseball Collectors Digest. And like I said, this was before eBay. And we would advertise all the stuff that Jerry or Kirk Gibson would collect. And by the time Kirk came along, we had a trunk that went on the airplane every time with him so he could put stuff in it. And we would advertise, and then every Friday, I would sit by the phone and you could call in and say, what are Ozzie Smith's shoes? What is the highest bid on it? So I would say $275 and it's postmarked Kansas City. So if you were in New Jersey, you knew that wasn't your bid, and even if it was $275. I couldn't tell them who bid, but I could tell them the postmark and the high bid. I talked to more wonderful people around the whole United States, and some I had London call, and I had one from Germany call, and just talked to them. It was rewarding. We talked about weather. We talked about baseball. We talked about kids. It was just great. It was great.
Wow. So you had, you were able to auction off stuff from other baseball teams beside the Dodgers then?
Well, yes, as the team would travel when the visiting team came to the stadium, they bring a minimum amount of equipment.
Right.
But when the Dodgers go to the teams and they're the visitor, they can ask the guys then, and the guys can give it to them then, and then they can put it in the equipment locker that we had that goes back on the plane. So yeah, the whole season, Kirk Gibson was collecting from every team that he visited.
Wow. So you mentioned Ozzie Smith, who's obviously a well-known name. Other players that you remember who you had stuff donated from?
God, we have things from almost every player. Hang on just 1 second. I'm going to go back. Yes, I do. This says that Kirk Gibson knocks it out of the park. This is just one page of it,
Oh, wow.
of the option items.
Oh, wow. So you got a lot of stuff.
And this gives some details about it.
Wow.
So hold on, like I could read this, it's turned so yellow. Wally Joyner jersey,
Oh,
Andre Dawson jersey,
wow.
Bo Jackson jersey,
Wow.
Jay Howell jersey, Mike Scioscia jersey, Howard Johnson hat, Pedro Guerrero hat,
Wow.
autographed baseballs, gloves, shoes. Shoes were interesting. Just, I can't tell you, there was just a plethora of things.
A lot of stuff. So yeah, go ahead.
I never knew what I was doing. This just happened. It's just one of those things that, you had. Here's one, a Canadian hunting trip for two with Kirk Gibson. He owns some property up there, and they bid on that. A personal tour of Dodger Stadium with Orel Hershiser. Half a day in the life of Tommy Lasorda.
Oh, wow.
Dodger Fantasy Camp. These were all things that were on the auction.
Wow. So a lot of stuff. So over time, you raised millions of dollars then, or?
Over time, what?
How much money do you think you raised? Any idea?
When we started out in our beginning in the 80s, we cleared about $60,000. As we went along, we were in the 150, 200, depending, like the years we had fashion shows or the years we had the auction. Yeah, we did good.
So has it continued?
There is still a Los Angeles, there still is a 65 Roses unit within the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, but I don't know how that works. I do not.
Okay. All right. So
once I moved from Los Angeles, I'm not even happy going back.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you. So that's great. Any other stories that you can relate to us?
I didn't know that you were going to ask me. Come right up with them. I told you the one about Kirk Gibson and his mom.
Yeah.
Not that there's 100 of them, but I don't think of any right now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Well, thank you. That was terrific.
Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you.